see, but I don't know.
Naomi, it says I can't start video because you stopped it. Hey. It says you stopped video.
Can you hear me? You are mute. I can't hear you.
Yep, we're gonna wait if you want to put your video on, and then we'll go mute.
I put, but say unable to start video. You can't start your video because the host has stopped it.
No.
So maybe Melanie stopped it.
I made Afif the host, so
One of you should let me in
We'll
my video.
hear you. And
You say
Matt-
you can't start your
Matt,
video.
who's attending live, is hearing all this technical background stuff. Sorry about that, man.
try clicking like the little, you see the little video thing next to his name, Afif?
Yeah.
Try clicking that and see if it'll let you.
Yeah, still say unable.
It's weird. It's not. I'll make you the host, Dad. See if it. Well, I don't want to do that because if he gets stuck with technical
Yeah.
stuff.
We can rejoin then.
Yeah, why don't you try rejoining?
All right.
And it's like awkward. Sorry, Matt, we are not technical wizards.
I can sing some light music. I can create a mood.
It still say unable. I don't know why.
Okay, well, worst case, we don't need your video. That's kind of a pain. I wonder why it's doing that. Any ideas, Molly? Can you put video
Let me
on
look
there?
up and see. Can I go on video?
Yeah, I'm just like, will it allow you to? Trying to
Mm-mm.
figure that out.
Try going into security, Afif. Do you see anything under there?
You know, we can go live on Facebook.
Ooh.
Should we do it?
We're over here like, we can't get video to work, Matt, but we can go live on Facebook.
Apparently. I don't have the security option here. Let me take a look.
I still see.
I'm sorry, the new webinar features only allow the host to either have it or everyone has video. And I didn't want it to slow down the like connectivity, having everyone have their video on. So it's either all or none.
So why don't you make it all and then see what happens?
I don't know if I can change it now. Let me go into the Zoom settings. Give me 1 second.
Well, at least we are learning.
Oh yeah, well, let me edit it since it's live.
Okay, well, that's okay. We'll first one, we'll keep tightening it as we go.
You can make even a joke about, oh, you know, Zoom.
I'm sorry now.
It's just Zoom is so high security. We can't show you because you're too much of a celebrity, Dr. G.
All right, well, it's 3 on the dot, and we have a couple people in, and I know we're also sharing this recorded, so do you want to kick things off, Melanie?
Sure. So thank you all for joining. So happy to have you. Obviously, it's just kind of weird staring at my picture, but only wanted to show a few fun video today. So like we talked about in email, you guys know Dr. G is such an expert in so many areas. And the microbiome is the foundation, right? Everyone knows gut health, the importance that it plays for the most part, but understanding really what the microbiome is, the role it plays in your health, and how different things can impact that. So wanted to bring Afif and Dr. G on today to share with you guys a little bit more about the foundation of the microbiome, the role it plays in your health, and more. So as you are watching and listening, feel free to submit questions so that way we can answer them. We'll save all questions till the end, just so that way Dr. G and Afif can get through everything that they want to talk about. And then we'll answer all of those questions. And if you don't get a chance to get your question answered or miss out, think of something later, feel free to send us an email or chat with us on our website. You can send us an email to support@biomhealth.com, and we can answer all of those questions there as well. So it's all you guys.
Thanks, Melanie. So I think something that would be helpful for us, because we do a lot of talks like this, and for us, it's helpful to know what kind of level you're at with the microbiome, because then if we're covering stuff that's too basic, it might not actually be informative, or if it's too complex, you know, the same. So there's a function where you can raise your hand, or you can just put it in the chat. Can you tell us, do you feel somewhat familiar with the microbiome? Do you feel comfortable with the basics? Do you want to cover the basics? If you can let us know in the chat, or just, you know, some indication of what kind of like complexity you're at, that would be super helpful, because then we can kind of tailor the question. So while people are doing that, I'm Afif Ghannoum. I'm CEO of BIOHM, co-founder of BIOHM, and my co-host is Dr. Ghannoum. Shockingly, we're related. He's my dad. And really, 2 seconds, the genesis of BIOHM was that my father, who's still active researcher at Case Western School of Medicine, he did a big clinical trial for the NIH on the microbiome of Crohn's patients. And what he found was that bacteria and fungi were working together to create very aggressive biofilms in the guts of people dealing with Crohn's. And a couple things came out of that. He published his work, and the role of fungi really had never been talked about. And then biofilms had never been talked about in the gut. So we thought it was kind of interesting. And so that was really the genesis of BIOHM. So a couple of people have answered. It sounds like, well, you know, a couple of people are intermediate. Some people have just started. Someone said, I'm being treated by Cleveland Clinic, functional medicine, Dr. Gundry. Well, that was actually on Dr. Gundry's podcast maybe a year ago. He's really great at what he does. So we'll kind of hit in the middle. So we'll cover some of the basics, and just as you have questions, just drop them in the chat and we're happy to answer away. So Dad, let's start with hitting it over the basics. Can you describe the microbiome and how bacteria and fungi play a role? And again, this is a conversation, everyone. We're going to start doing these on a more regular basis. So any questions you have, topics you want us to cover, just throw them in the chat. We'll cover as many as we can, and let's go from there.
Great. First of all, thank you very much, everybody, for joining. And as Afif said, let me start by saying what really defining the microbiome. What is the microbiome? If you think about it, microbiome are the organisms or the microbes that live on or in our body. When I say on, it means on the skin or in our body, like in our mouth, in our gut, any place where the microbes live on, we have what we call the microbiome. And if you think about it, there are 100 trillion microbes that live on and in our body. So you can see this is this really huge number of cells. They really outnumber by many, many fold the number of cells that our body has.
Well, and Dad, one thing I want to point out, because I think sometimes it can go quickly. When we're talking about the microbiome in this context, a lot of times people think gut health, but our bodies actually have several microbiomes, right? Because you're saying like in and on. So some of the microbiomes that we deal with are, obviously the gut. For women, vaginal. Oral cavity has microbiome. In fact, I'm going to call him Dad. It's weird for me to call him Dr. Ghannoum. But you identified 101 native fungal species in the oral microbiome, right? So your skin is a microbiome. So I always like to point that out, that we use this term microbiome generally in regards to the gut, but there's several different distinct communities of microbiomes in and on your body.
Yeah, and really to this point, when we say, let's say, what is the microbiome or the organism that live on our skin, we call it the microbiota because it is specific to a certain site. In the oral cavity, also there is microbiota, but when you look at the total thing, it's microbiome, okay? And in this regard, one very important point that I would like to point out is, everybody, when you hear about the microbiome or you go and read the newspaper or television, everybody talks about bacteria. In fact, our body has a number of different microbial communities. You have, of course, bacteria, you have fungus, you have viruses, also parasites are there. So it is not just one community, which is the bacteria, it's all together what forms the microbiome. And in this regard, this is very important to understand because one community can affect the other. Like in other words, if we take an antibiotic, guess what? We kill bacteria. And the bacteria, not only that causing an infection, we are sick, we have sore throat or whatever, we also are killing the good guys, the good microorganisms that help us, okay? So it's very important to know that when you're looking at total microbiome, it's not only bacteria, but also fungus as well.
I'm actually going to share a picture because this blew my mind because my dad, when he first explained, hey, listen, there's bacteria, fungus in the gut. A lot of times people are surprised by that, but especially for women, the paradigm that often they experience is when they take an antibiotic and then a yeast infection results. The reason is you're getting rid of all that bacteria, and now the fungi and yeast is really left, to bloom out of control. So one of the things my dad had explained is you'll often hear that even though, yeah, there's bacteria, there's fungi in the gut, there's a lot more bacteria in the gut than fungi. And that is true. But this picture that is from one of our earliest studies, I really think, and I found this quickly, I actually sent it to our designer because he's putting it in some ads for us, but I really think this makes it clear just how big fungi is of an issue. So this guy in the middle, this is Candida tropicalis, which is a very aggressive type of fungi that if it grows out of control can cause issues. These little guys, these are bacteria. So what's wild about that is fungi in your gut can actually be 10 times bigger than the bacteria, right? So if you think about it, bacteria, that's what we've been talking about for probably almost 2 decades now when it comes to probiotics, gut health, but you're ignoring this giant piece of the puzzle in your gut. Now, this picture is even more interesting because part of my father's research, and for anybody, if you'd like links to that research, just put it in the chat and we're happy to share it. What he found was that bacteria and fungi weren't just only in the gut, but they were actually working together to create this very aggressive biofilm, right? And you can see, I don't know if you can see these lines, but this is bacteria actually fusing together and then fusing to the fungi. And that is how we're seeing the collaboration between these two kingdoms. And when they do that, the fungus actually becomes super, super hard to break down, the biofilms. And I'm gonna, as Dad talks, I'm gonna try and pull some other pictures to share. But that's the paradigm that I think a lot of people don't realize is going on in the gut. Is it's not just that it's bacteria or fungi, it's that they're really working together. That's where the issues can arise.
Absolutely. This is a very important point. But another thing I want to explain, which Afif mentioned a lot, is about biofilms. So let me make it simple. What is a biofilm? It's like the plaque in your teeth. You know, every morning we brush our teeth to get rid of all these microbes that are on our mouth. And guess what? This is the plaque, or what we call scientifically a biofilm. The same sort of story occurs in our gut. These organisms, which Afif showed you, bacteria and two bacteria, in fact, one called E. coli, Escherichia coli, and the other called Serratia marcescens, comes and interact with the candida and form this really plaque, digestive plaque or digestive biofilms. And when this happens, guess what? These organisms are protected. They are protected from antimicrobials, they are protected from our immune system. So really, it's very hard to get rid of them. Okay?
The analogy, the simplest analogy is, obviously everybody understands the idea of plaque on your teeth. Think of a pool that's got like maybe a third full, and it's kind of that gross water, hasn't been kept up, and it's just filled with bacteria. And then if you put a pool cover on top, it would be really hard to clean up that water. That biofilm is like putting a pool cover over very aggressive fungi and bacteria on a digestive lining. Same thing going on your teeth. With the biofilm, what we're doing is we're removing that pool cover so we can actually treat what's going on underneath. So that's really the way to think about it. It's like a shield protecting those organisms, you know, causing issues underneath.
It's like when you know the film The Matrix. It's like, really, it is called biofilm matrix, as if there is, as Afif put it nicely, a protective cover that all these organisms under this matrix, and nothing can get them. And that's where the challenge, which we really wanted to solve when we started the Biome.
All right, so Dad, one question a lot of people I know ask us is, can you explain the difference between a prebiotic and a probiotic?
Sure. Prebiotic is basically the food that good bacteria eats. It's fiber. It's probiotic is mainly fiber, okay? So when we eat fiber, it goes to our gut. Our intestine will not break it down. Guess who break the fibers down? It's these microbes, little beneficial bacteria called lactobacillus or bifidobacterium. They start use it as food, and as a result, they start to produce these good chemicals, okay, called metabolites that can help our immune system. So that prebiotic basically is food for the good guys, okay? Probiotic are live strains of microbes. So it is a microorganism, whether it is bacteria, such as lactobacillus, I mentioned, or a good fungus, such as Saccharomyces cerevisiae, that we take in, and when it goes to our gut, we need it to be alive, because by being viable, what we call it in science, it will be good because it can start controlling the bad microorganisms and also help the beneficial organisms.
So the analogy we always use is, think about your gut as a garden, right? So like prebiotics, all you're doing is you're kind of laying down topsoil. And what it does is it literally is food for probiotics, but it's also lowering the pH in the gut. So it makes it like a super friendly area for probiotics to grow. And then probiotics are just simply seeds in the garden, so that's the dynamic. So oftentimes, we'll get people asking us, well, what probiotic should I be using? Should I be worried about specific strains? And we really think it makes way more sense to do a couple of things. One, think about what you're doing to get dietary fiber in your diet. And that could be using a prebiotic, but we always say, whether it's probiotics, prebiotics, they're dietary supplements. They should be a supplement to what you're doing with your diet, right? So really, you should be thinking about what can you do as far as increasing prebiotic fiber, dietary fiber, a lot of plant-based diet, but not too much. One of the things, and I'm happy if people want to get into this, maybe if people can do a raised hand, we can get a little more into the weeds. But we recently launched a quiz, and what we found were a number of issues that if someone had that condition or issue, they were more likely to either have an imbalanced gut or a candida overgrowth and potentially infection. So happy to jump in and share those. But one, why I brought that up was what we found was vegetarians were statistically more likely to actually have an imbalanced gut and candida overgrowth. So a lot of people will say, oh, that's kind of surprising. I thought plant-based diet is good. And that is true. But the problem is a lot of people that are vegetarians aren't necessarily using a plant-based diet. They're using a lot of processed foods, a lot of artificial sweeteners. Those are things that can really exacerbate what's going on in your gut. So again, it's interesting to see that certain things are tied with that you would think are really healthy can actually be tied to an imbalanced gut.
I really like the analogy that Afif gave about the garden, but I want to take you in a different path. You heard about Afif saying, like, you eat this food, it's gonna help this organism and the other. To me, what the main message is that, listen, the balancing of the microbiome in your gut is like taking care of your garden, okay? In the garden, we give fertilizers, we give topsoil so that we enrich the really roses so that they grow and we enjoy it now in the summer, as well as, of course, now that spring started here in Ohio. But we want also to stop the bad guys. We want to stop them, which are the weeds, okay? And that's why it's very important to eat the right food, to have the right lifestyle. So basically, my main message is that a lot of this is in your hand. Do you want to have roses, in other words, beneficial organisms, or do you want to have weeds, which are the pathogen or organism that can cause disease?
No, someone asked, let's take a question that someone asked is, how do you explain people's success that do a carnivore diet, which is like truly only eating meat? And I guess my first question would be what you mean by success. I'm going to take it to mean that it's healthy, it's not causing them issues. So there's a couple of things. When you look at the medical literature, it is definitely tied to an imbalanced gut, overgrowth of pretty aggressive bacteria and fungi when you're only eating a meat-based diet, which makes a lot of sense because you're completely obviously eliminating fiber, things like that. But the other thing is the way someone's microbiome actually impacts their lifestyle or turns into digestive issues really can be influenced by other things like genetic factors, whether they have other lifestyle factors, high stress, exercise issues. Those things come into play. So while diet, we talk about diet a lot, lifestyle factors are huge. Like a lot of people who take our gut test, they'll come to us and say, I eat perfectly, I exercise all the time, I'm very careful with my supplementation, but I still have pretty bad digestive issues. And what we'll see is that a lot of times they identify as extremely stressed. And what we found is when we're able to help them think through how to lower that stress, their digestive issues ease, right? So one of the things about microbiome, which is really interesting, but it can be frustrating, is that it's truly multifactorial, meaning like it's not necessarily one factor that could be adjusting how you're feeling, right? So someone on a carnivore diet, it may just work for them, right? But overall, what the literature shows is it's not necessarily a great diet for your microbiome.
Exactly. I mean, the point which you said, it's when we look at the microbiome, and you have carnivore meat, especially red meat with fats and whatever, they have a number of disadvantages. And with respect to the microbiome, it will support the growth of microbes, what we call them pro-inflammatory, which means microbes that can really aggravate and cause inflammation, okay? Now, if you eat chicken, for example, which is a carnivore, it's not as bad as the red meat. If you eat fish, for example, also like salmon, fantastic. And guess what? It does not have the same bad effect on the microbiome. In fact, they have beneficial effect, okay? So the bottom line also, what Afif really pointed out, it's like very complex. Biology is complex. It's not like one thing fits all. No, there are more than one factor play a role. If you eat meat and this sort of thing, you exercise, you sleep well, you are not stressed, you know, you are really stacking the deck in your favor, okay?
And it's really boring, and I'll give you a great example, though, of why it really does make a difference is moderation really is that boring answer that people don't necessarily want to hear, but I'll give you an example. A couple years ago, we saw a big cluster of people taking the microbiome test, severe overgrowth of a very aggressive type of fungi called Zygomycota. And, you know, my dad, when he saw that, he said, you know, typically we're only seeing that with people that are severely immunocompromised, like HIV patients, cancer patients, like something's really off with their system. But there was enough of a cluster that we thought, that's unlikely to be the explanation. There's something going on here. When we dug deeper, what we found was for this cluster, they were completely eliminating carbohydrates and dairy from their diet. What the problem with that is carbohydrates and dairy can actually be very good microbiome foods, can encourage probiotic growth. They're, you know, great prebiotic base. So what we found was that when they introduced dairy and carbohydrates back even moderately, their digestive issues really eased, right? And that was wild to us because, again, you're talking about a fungi that typically you only see with people with pretty aggressive immune disorders. And for these poor people dealing with this, they would have never thought that cutting out dairy and carbs, which a lot of times we think of as actually being a good thing, could have such a negative impact, you know? So microbiome, it really is one of these areas where a lot of times there's a ton of levers that you just have to kind of methodically walk through. And, you know, sometimes people cut out alcohol and that's what does it for them. And it's easy. Other times it's a little more nuanced.
Yeah, in this regard, sorry, go ahead, Afif.
Sorry, I was just going to give one other example of this. There's a guy that Dad and I are pretty friendly with, former UFC fighter, cut out of marble. This guy is just like peak elite fitness, dealing with terrible digestive issues. So asked us to help him out, did microbiome tests, looked at everything. His diet was great. But what we honed in on was because of his exercise regimen that was so extreme, it was causing his digestive issues because his microbiome was constantly under stress. So when he dialed it back a little bit, guess what happened? Saw his issues ease, you know, and then obviously we helped him introduce prebiotics, dietary fiber in his diet. That also helped, but it was something that it just was not on his radar, that the way he was exercising could be the source of complications.
You know, in this regard, we also found in the literature that people, a paper published in actually Ireland where people play rugby. It's like football with no protection, you know, American football with no protection, really tough sport. Guess what? Because of their extreme exercise, their microbiome was also affected. And the mechanism is that, you remember, when you are exercising, all your blood flow is going towards, you know, your muscles and this sort of thing. And we are depriving our gut from a lot of those sources. So that's why, for us, it's very important that you exercise, but take everything in moderation, because that really will go a long way to help you.
No, someone asked a question. I wanted to clarify this because it's actually a very good question. We've been asked this before when we have shared that anecdote about dairy and carbohydrates, which is basically like, are you a proponent of people eating dairy, even if they're lactose intolerant, based on the idea that you're balancing things out? And our answer is no. Like ultimately, all these things are balances. So if you are lactose intolerant, like you need to ultimately balance what's best for your system. But a lot of times people are cutting those things out, even though they may not be lactose intolerant.
You know, but also with respect to the dairy, in the book which I published, Total Gut Balance, we recommend that you take dairy, but try to make it non-fat or low fat. This is really important because we want to get rid of the polysaturated fatty acids, you know, fatty acids which are not good. So if you take skim milk, for example, they don't have it, but the dairy has very good sources of proteins, casein, vitamins. So that will help you. Whereas we want to eliminate the really bad players, such as the saturated fats.
Now, Dad, one question that someone asked was, how do you diagnose microbiome issues or dietary issues that contribute to inflammation? So can you explain how inflammation and the microbiome tie together?
Yes, sure. I mean, what happened, let's talk about it. First, what happens if you have some inflammatory issues? Usually the gut in the microbiome in our gut, they are out of balance. This means we have more bad guys or more pathogens than the other one. And what happens here is when you have pathogens, the example which Afif gave, like Candida and E. coli, they are staying on the lining of our gut. And when they are working together, they start to break the lining. We have, you know, they should be cells, they should be really very intimately close together, intact. However, when you have these organisms going and starting poking holes, you have what we call as leaky gut. And when you have leaky gut, guess what? You are causing toxins, bacterial toxins to go in, unwanted food to go in, and that results in inflammation. Okay? So there is a relationship between the microbes in our gut, the barrier, which is our cell lining, which we need to have it impermeable to the let's say called LPS, you know, lipopolysaccharides, which are toxins produced by bacteria. So by having that, things start going through into our blood system or circulation, and of course that causes inflammation.
And related to that, one of the things we found was that people that have arthritis that are in our microbiome database were statistically more likely to have microbiome imbalance. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I wouldn't have thought that. And Dad's like, no, it's not surprising because that's an inflammation issue, you know? So again, it's really amazing. One of the things we're constantly kind of just surprised at is how it's almost easier to find issues not related to the microbiome at this point than issues that are. So even something that seemingly would have no tie, like arthritis, can be tied to having an imbalanced gut, because that inflammation can, taking a step back, anytime you put your system under pressure, it's likely going to have an impact on a microbiome. So for example, they've seen people who go to the ER because they've just had like a traumatic car accident, their microbiome shifts because their body has now just been put under so much pressure. So that's the battle of the microbiome, is you're constantly fighting this balance and all these factors that, whether it's alcohol, diet, genetics, stress, sleep, all these things, if it's not one, it might be the other. And for the vast majority of people, it's not necessarily an ongoing issue, or they make some tweaks, but that's the thing, you have to really be able to balance and look at a number of these issues.
This really brings me to a question which I'm sure it's coming in the people's mind. Why is there heightened attention on the microbiome? I tell you, there are two stories. So far, I'm sure we frightened you saying, oh, every disease is associated with the microbiome. But at the same time, if you think about it, if you have a balanced microbiome, this really will help you a lot. And the studies have shown when you have a balanced microbiome, in other words, when we have organisms in our gut that playing well together, they are all beneficial, then you will find that the microbiome can help homeostasis or the balance, our overall balance. They also produce a number of beneficial compounds such as vitamins, vitamin K12, for example. They also communicate with our brain, the gut-brain axis, and even they affect our mood. So there are good stuff about the microbiome I wanted to remember when we have balance. The problem starts when you have imbalance. So you see two sides of the coin. Good things from a microbiome, but negative impact also at the same time. And that's where the diseases in different parts of our body, whether it is the oral cavity or the mouth, where we have tongue cancer, oral candidiasis, all of these have been related to the microbiome. Even psychological or neurodegenerative diseases are also influenced by the microbiome, such as Alzheimer, Parkinson's, autism. So you can see, I want you to think of it as a good thing. Don't get frightened. Oh, this microbiome is terrible. It is terrible if you don't take care of it, and it is in your hand. Okay.
So let's answer some more questions. So one of the questions that's kind of right down the middle is, how long does it take to change your gut balance? And Dan can dive into this more deeply, but what's interesting is the bacteria in your gut is actually reasonably difficult to adjust. It can be done, but it can take 3-6 months. What's interesting is the fungi in your gut can actually be adjusted in about 24 hours. There's a lot of studies on this. So that's why one of the other reasons to try and explain balancing both is that you really can impact the fungi in your gut. Now, we're coming up on time, so maybe we'll do one more question, and then it would be really helpful, even if in the chat Q&A, like, is this helpful? Would you guys be interested in us doing more of these? Would you want to be able to submit questions ahead of time? We're trying to make this an ongoing thing, but we obviously want to make sure it's going to be actually useful. Okay, cool. So it looks like so far some answers are yes. So let me hit a couple. So a couple follow-up questions about the dairy part. Just to be clear, we're not saying everybody absolutely must take dairy. What we're saying is it's all moderation, right? So if you are dealing with a gluten issue and you can't really deal with carbohydrates, or a lactose intolerance issue, that just tells you that you have to be a little more cautious about what you're doing with your microbiome, because you're eliminating something that's usually reasonably good for the microbiome. So maybe that means you have to be more aggressive in handling it through a plant-based diet, or considering a probiotic or a prebiotic. So that's what we're not just saying, like, no matter what, you must use dairy. We're just saying, like, listen, these are some of the factors that we've seen pop up. So let's see, any other closing remarks or questions? Would you guys want to see, I'll share one more thing. Would you guys want to see kind of an interesting little AI video we've done on our autism research that we haven't really shared, but you guys have been great, so we're happy to share. Okay, let me pull this up. This is really actually cool. So one of the things, obviously, we're a science-based company. To this day, my dad still has an active lab. So anything we're doing, while, yeah, of course we have BIOHM as a brand, we're really doing a lot of really interesting science in the background. So a couple of years ago, what we found was that we had a group of autistic children in our microbiome database. And when we reached out to their family, we were asking, like, well, what are you kind of concerned about? And they had seen that there was a lot of science around autism in the microbiome. So we're like, that's kind of interesting. So we did a deeper dive and we looked at the fungi difference in their gut and the bacteria difference in their gut. And so we have data scientists on our team, and we said, can you see differences between someone who's autistic and someone who's not autistic in their microbiome? So when we looked in the fungi, here's what's really cool. If there's a difference, they should start splitting the different colors. So you can see there's a definite difference in the fungi in the gut of people with autism, which is blue, versus non-autistic. And when you look at the bacteria, it's even more pronounced. you can see this big difference. So we thought that was fascinating. In the last year or so, we've been doing a lot of research, and actually what we're doing is we're now going down the path to actually develop autistic therapeutics. Now it's a long road, but we love sharing this because it's an area that we don't, it's not just a brand to us. It's really something my father's dedicated his career to. And so we're starting to do that type of analysis for all sorts of different issues. So we're gonna have a lot of interesting things. And on these type of webinars, we're interested in knowing what issues you guys would like more information on, because we can look at our data and say, hey, guess what? Someone asked about this. Here's what we found in the data. So our plan is to continue to do these. And so, yeah, we really appreciate you, especially on a Friday afternoon, joining us. And this was our first one. We wanted to see if people actually found it interesting or if it would be boring. And so hopefully it's been interesting. And any other questions, feel free to email me. I'm always happy to answer questions. If we're going to answer, my email, I'll put in the chat, is just afif@biomhealth.com. And I will share that with everyone now. And we really appreciate it. And any questions you have, just let us know, and take care. We'll do another one of these.
And thank you very much for really joining us this afternoon. It was great fun. And thank you for the questions also.
And next time we'll reveal Dad behind we are not Zoom masters, so he couldn't get his video to work.
Thank you guys so much. We're going to do this, like they said, the first Friday of every month. So make sure you check your email. If you're not subscribed to the BIOHM emails, that's where we'll make announcements on the different topics. The next one's going to be the gut-brain axis. So really excited to dive deeper into that. Like Afif mentioned, if your question didn't get answered, feel free to email him. Feel free to email support@BIOHM Health. We're happy to answer all of those. Definitely want to make sure that everyone's questions get answered. And this will also be sent out in a recording in an email tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that.
And one last thing on the gut-brain axis, Psychology Today actually just launched a blog that Dad is going to be doing once or twice a month, exploring just the gut-brain axis. So I put that in the chat. If you just put Ghannoum Psychology Today, it'll pop up. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.